Ready for your weekly dose of brain gymnastics? Here, every opinion is a piece of the puzzle, and normal is just a setting on the dryer. We've only got one rule. All ideas are wrong ideas. Not because they're flawed, but because they offer a unique perspective worth exploring. So, if you keep an open mind and embrace the unconventional, you just might find that you've got the wrong idea.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Wrong Idea podcast. I'm Lucas, here with my brother Jack. How you doing? Excited?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing great. So tell us, what are we talking about this week?
Well, this week we're diving into holding grudges. It's a well-known idea and a well-known concept amongst everybody. Someone's held a grudge against you at some point, or you've held a grudge against someone at some point. You know, you think of any instance, you've had a little, scuffle with a friend or whatever, and you've held some resentment against them for a couple of days, then you guys reconcile, or maybe a partner cheats on you, and then you have deep resentment towards them for breaking your trust and changing your idea of love for the rest of your life. But it's a broad spanning concept.
Absolutely. In what way are we talking about? Like, how do we have the wrong idea?
Well, some people will either subconsciously hold grudges and not realize, just thinking that they've gotten over whatever happened, or believing that they've come to a reasonable conclusion, like they've found their closure, but it still drags on in their mind, because I feel like that is one of the most common things that people will do.
Okay, so you're saying that you think people tend to hold on to things longer than they should?
Yeah, I would say so. I think that people will tend to subconsciously hold on to things because they've hurt them deeper than they want to admit. They feel that on the surface, they've let go. It's not that big of a deal, but really they just don't want to admit how much it had an impact on them deep down.
Ah, okay. So you're saying that what people get wrong is really that feeling of letting go.
Yeah, for sure. I think that people struggle with that a lot, because letting go is hard. After all, at some point, whatever you held on to held a deep-seated place in your heart. So having to make that change, that shift to finally let it not have that much weight in your heart is a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, that I resonate with for sure. I know that when you hold on to those things for a long time, letting go, it feels like if you actually let it go, it's been there for so long that now something feels missing.
Right? It feels unfamiliar, and sometimes people fear that change of unfamiliarity, for sure.
I think the other thing is that people just don't, maybe people feel like they don't want to admit that they're wrong.
Absolutely, yeah. Own their own self-judgment. They judge themselves for feeling it the way that they do.
And I guess what I mean is, like, if you're going to let go, that might mean that you have to admit you're wrong. And that is itself is hard.
Yeah. Because I think you can fool other people just by saying, oh yeah, I'm wrong, sorry, whatever. But really deep down internalizing that you were wrong is a pretty hard thing to do.
Oh, yeah. And I know I have a friend in particular I'm thinking of. It's very hard for him to let go of certain things. And it's like, he might even know that he's wrong, but he still doesn't want to let it go, because that means literally accepting the truth of, yeah, I screwed up in this situation or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the whole reason that I came to this episode's conclusion was because of a friend. I, from a young age, realized that I never really held grudges, because I had, friends along the way who did, and I never really understood it, because I'm like, well, I'm not here for that long. This planet's been around for whatever it is, like 4.5 billion years, and I'm going to be lucky to see 100 of them, So me holding some sort of useless hatred that may not even be shared with another person doesn't really serve me much of a purpose. But I had a friend, an old friend, who was a wrestler, and he didn't know beforehand, but he had a small hairline fracture in his forearm. And there was one time at lunch when it was raining, so me, him, and our other friend all went up into the acting classroom, and people were doing arm wrestles. And me being all macho me was like, yeah, let's arm wrestle. Let's have fun. He's like, yeah, sure, I'm down. So we do it. Arm wrestle goes on, and I don't know, maybe 15 seconds in, there's just a massive pop.
Oof.
And I'm like, oh, brother. So he goes off to the nurse. I have no clue what happens until 8 o'clock that night. I'm losing it in Spanish class. I'm like, oh God, what's gone on here? Has he dislocated his arm? Did something break? Or I didn't know.
Am I the Incredible Hulk? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, literally. I'm like, did I just discover that I have massive superhuman strength here? But I got a call at 8 o'clock that night where he told me that he had spiral fractured his arm, which ended up happening because the muscle in his shoulder like contracted to try and stop something from dislocating, and that like caught it and twisted it and caused the spiral.
Ouch.
Yeah, but the only thing he requested from me was that I bought him a new hoodie because they had to cut the sleeve off.
That seems fair.
Right, it's reasonable. So I bought him the hoodie, right, and it took a while to come in the mail, but for about 3-4 weeks afterwards of that happening, we were totally cool. Everything was normal. Nothing had happened. He's like, let's just like not talk about it because it's just gonna aggravate me. I'm like, that's totally fair. So everything was fine, and then there was a Hanukkah party of our like mutual friend who's my best friend. And after that night, he never sent another message in our group chat with the three of us, and he just like completely flipped some sort of switch in his mind. And the belief was that his mother talked to him, gave him some sort of, you call it a lecture, whatever you want to call it, in the car when they were driving home that night because it didn't look like I was impacted by what had happened.
Ah, I see.
And after that, I'm thankful for it to this day that my closest friend, who was also friends with him, sided with me, stuck by my side, because realistically, I mean, there's not much I could have done. Like, I don't know
No,
what I could have done to prevent it.
if neither of you had knowledge of the fracture to begin with, it's kind of impossible. Like, that's just an unfortunate event, right?
So yeah, I'm ever grateful to that because yeah, that's my best friend. Like he and I are super tight, and we go to the gym with each other like literally every day. And if I didn't have that, I probably don't know where I'd be. But I definitely saw the impact that losing him had on him.
Wait, sorry. You said who are you talking about?
Okay, so the impact that losing my best friend, my closest friend, had on my old friend.
Ah, got it.
His physique, for one, changed because he stopped coming to the gym with us. Of course, 1, by force of having a broken arm, and 2, by force of not coming back after it was healed. His demeanor walking around the hallways of the school was completely different. Even the shape of his face had slightly changed. It was remarkable to see. I'm like, what is going on? This dude who I used to be totally tight, cool friends with has like just randomly turned into this like stranger, and it was really weird.
Yeah, that like I kind of know what you mean. This brings up for me some interesting questions. I think there's a theme with grudges around forgiveness, and that seems like where he's stuck is that despite the fact that it was an accident, he's having trouble forgiving you for what happened.
Absolutely. I mean, 100%. He had admitted to me multiple times afterwards. He's like, yeah, it's an accident. I don't blame you for it. But like you said, deep down inside, I don't think he ever really forgave me for what had happened.
Yeah, I wonder, what do you think in general? Do you think that forgiveness is that how we let go of grudges, or are there other means?
There are absolutely other means. I get what you're saying. I think that empathy has to be one of them. And I think these are all interconnected, but empathy, right, being the ability to put yourself into someone else's shoes, would be incredibly important in something like this, because that was my first step into, understanding why he felt this way towards me. Oh, because if I'm him, I would totally understand this, right? Like, my arm is broken. I have to stop doing my sport because he was a wrestler. He couldn't wrestle. He couldn't work out. Me, myself, I can't go more than like a day and a half without going to the gym. It drives me nuts. So I couldn't imagine not being able to work out. So I was very able to quickly understand why he, felt the way he did. So, I understood. I'm like, okay, fine. Feel how you feel. But I think that for whatever reason, just it may have crossed his mind, but never really sunk in of, he couldn't really have done anything about it. Because I remember now, actually, one of his gripes was that he felt like I didn't apologize enough.
Oh, interesting.
But what's fascinating is that anytime I try apologizing for it at lunch when I'd see him, because I didn't have any classes with him, he'd be like, just don't talk about it, man. It's fine. Let's just move forward, which is fascinating. It's a little contradictory.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to ask if you had, I assumed that you had apologized, but clearly if he's dismissing those apologies and yet he wanted you to make amends somehow, seems weird.
Oh, yeah, I know. I don't know what he wanted me to do, because by the time, like I mentioned earlier, I had ordered him a hoodie. By the time that the hoodie had come, he didn't even want it. He's like, oh, you never made amends. I'm like, I did my best to make amends. The night that he called me, apologized for like 10 minutes straight, and all he did was make jokes.
Deflection.
Yep, absolutely. Yep, using humor as a coping mechanism, but in a interesting way. But it was so strange to me that he felt like I never apologized, never made amends, because I did everything in my power to do it. As a matter of fact, I let him take a boxing glove, because I'm a boxer. I let him take a boxing glove and hook me in the stomach like 25 times sitting up against a concrete wall.
Ow.
I'm like, okay, fine. You felt pain. I'll feel this pain. And it was cool, right? Like as a boxer, it's kind of fun to get hit. You kind of can show off a little, but it wasn't like it was the most comfortable experience in my life. But like, still, for whatever reason, bro felt like I didn't make amends.
So going back to this empathy concept, I think you did a good job of trying to put yourself in his shoes. I understand, like, you're able to see it from his perspective, but it sounds like maybe he's not doing the same. And to extrapolate from this example, like in general, people probably just have a hard time doing that, right?
Absolutely. I think, it's perspective overarchingly. Being able to feel someone else's emotions, you really need to be able to feel an emotion of your own, because it's the only way to replicate it. You need something relatable. You can't just try and, it's unreasonable to expect to be able to throw a random emotion at someone that they've never felt and expect them to be able to feel it.
Yeah, I mean, what comes to mind is the difference between sympathy and empathy. If you haven't actually felt it, it's really hard to empathize because you can't sympathize. But that's the point. It's like trying to put yourself in any sort of analogous position to get to the point where you're like, I may not know what this is like, but I can understand how they might have felt.
Yeah, you don't need the exact conclusion. You need something to get you to understand where they may have gotten to that conclusion.
I wonder what you think, if you were in his situation, how would you have approached it? I mean, because you say you've never held grudges, but like if you felt wronged, like what kind of mechanisms do you have for dealing with these situations?
Personally, I think initially off the bat, I probably wouldn't have taken it as well as he did. To be fair, like, I know myself that I can be fairly impulsive and reactive, especially because I'm a tennis player, and having a fracture in your arm would take me out just as the way it took him out. But I have 5 or 6 close friends who were on my tennis team. He didn't know anybody on wrestling at the time. He was still getting to know them. So it would have been hard for me to sit out, because it also would have been my first season playing on the team, my sophomore year. I wouldn't have played. So it would have really annoyed me. So I figured that I probably would have been more annoyed with him off the bat. Though I do also know that one of my strongest skills is being able to remain calm and think clearly when there's through adversity or through, like high stress, high adrenaline moments. So I would willingly admit that I probably would have been pretty seething off the bat, knowing what I would have known. Though I would say that, just talking to him about it, which he didn't feel open doing, I think was something that held him back. Talking to him about it, just simple conversations like, it's all good. Like, I'm annoyed, but it's all good. It's not your fault. I feel like that was the one thing that he really missed for whatever reason. I say that personally. I feel like he missed the fact that it wasn't my fault. There's nothing else that I could have done to have stopped that event. So I feel like that would have been my saving grace from not holding a grudge. Is I know that it's just it's an unfortunate event. Not every event needs a source of blame or a culprit. Things can happen. That's sort of just how life works.
I completely agree. I love that philosophy. I think there are 2 key mechanisms you brought up there that I love. One is like letting yourself feel the feelings, because when you gave me the example, it definitely sounded like he wanted to ignore it or like pretend it didn't happen or like push it away.
Exactly. He wanted to like shove it into a corner rather than facing it head on.
Yeah, and your version, you're saying like you probably would have just like exploded up front, which there's ways to deal with that too. But like, I think that, to your point, I think that actually helps. It's like, if you got to feel it, you got to know that like this pissed me off.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can only act as if for so long, right? I can only act as if this isn't like totally wrecking me for a long time for, however it is, like, maybe like for him, 3 or 4 weeks was probably his boiling point. So he never really, like you said, he never felt the anger that came with it. He kind of just tried to shove it aside and act like it wasn't a problem.
And then the second one that I really liked is just the idea of talking through it, actively being in the moment with someone and be like, look, let me explain to you how I'm feeling, even if they're not receptive to it, even just for them to be able to hear your perspective, to hear what you're thinking, and then for you to be able to say it and get it out. I think these are the important things, regardless of how people are receiving those messages, you saying them, you figuring out how you want to express how you're feeling is an important coping mechanism.
Absolutely. Being able to put your thoughts into words is extremely difficult in itself, but being able to do that with emotions is even more complex. So being able to, like you said, just upfront talk about how it makes you feel sort of gives the other person automatic empathy to feel towards you. They're in your shoes. They know how you're feeling right from the jump. So some may call it guilt tripping. I think to an extent, if that's the emotions that you're feeling in the moment, the best way to do it is just to express them.
Sure. And I mean, at least like it gives you the opportunity to deal with those emotions up front. At least that person knows how you're feeling and can work it out with you. Like, hey, they might even be able to say, this isn't fair. Like, you can't, it's not my fault. Like, I know you're hurting, but this isn't something I can't do anything about it.
Yeah, it's like it's a little out of my control at this point, and even at that point, So all I can do now, right? Like everything in my power is just to apologize and try and help and do whatever I can do.
Right. And the point is just that it moves the conversation forward. I guess that's where I was going with it.
It's doing something rather than doing nothing. Doing nothing keeps you in the same place. Doing something will at least move you somewhere.
Yeah, I like that a lot.
Because I think even so, if it pulls the two of you apart, I think that's more natural, right? Like if that's what's supposed to happen, that's what'll happen. But if it's able to reconcile and recover the relationship, I think that's what's supposed to happen as well. So doing something is better than doing nothing.
Yeah, actually, that's a great point. Sometimes there are just events that end relationships, and that sucks, but that's the reality of the situation. And it's better to get to that point where you're like, yeah, I don't think we're going to be able to reconcile this. And like that in itself is at least some kind of closure.
Exactly. It's not a one-sided closure where each person comes to their own conclusion. At least it's like, if you would have just told me, look, I know who I am. I'm not going to be able to really fully forgive you for this. Fine, right? Like you are who you are, and it is what it is.
Right. But at least there isn't, hopefully, now there isn't that like resentment.
Yeah, for sure. It's not as much of a weight on either person. It wasn't a weight on me for very long, maybe, a week or two, but for him, it drug out for months.
Well, maybe this is your point in the whole thing here is like holding the grudge. Like at least you're no longer holding it. Right?
Yeah. Like you said, the holding part, being able to just let go, release a little bit is hard. We said that at the beginning.
Yeah, it's the weight of the grudge that is the thing you want to get rid of. It's not about blame. I think you really hit the nail on the head there. We're not looking for.
So we're not looking for a culprit. Yeah.
What we want to do though is release that weight so that we can at least feel lighter.
Yeah, absolutely. I even would say, I think with Dad that he tends to try and look for a culprit whenever something happens.
Sure.
And that was, growing up, it's something easy to just kind of be like, huh, you don't really, like as a little kid, you'll kind of just think there's not really someone to blame, but he's blaming them. I don't know why.
Yeah, I do think I picked up on that as well. And that's actually one of the reasons I don't do it. Maybe you and I are similar in that way of like holding grudges because it's like we kind of realize, hey, maybe he's putting that burden unnecessarily on them or whatever.
Right. Or even placing it unnecessarily upon himself to, need to find someone to have the blame on.
So before we wrap up, I want to ask a question around, are there situations where holding a grudge might actually be beneficial?
Fascinating question. And typically, I don't like making absolutes. I think absolutes are problematic in thought because exceptions are always around. They're always a thing. But personally, I think that holding grudges may be one of the very few things that really, really serves no purpose.
Well, it's interesting. I wonder, again, I'm thinking from the perspective of protecting yourself. If there's something that happened, someone did something that upset you and you hold on to that, you remember that. And then in a similar situation, because of that grudge, you make a different choice than you would have before. Mm-hmm. And it actually works out in your favor. I'm just thinking, playing devil's advocate.
I'll go to a quote from John Dewey. I had to do a little project as him in my history class just recently in school. And I had to pick a quote from him. And I think this quote reflects this perfectly. It is, "We do not learn from an experience. We learn from reflecting on an experience." And to me, this gets across what I'm trying to say here. It's that holding that grudge for such a long period of time won't teach you anything. It won't help you make a better decision. But if you're able to sort of let go, see something from the other side, reflect upon what happened, then you'll start to get the learning. You'll start to be able to advance your thinking, shape how experiences have an effect upon you.
I love that. But I'm going to challenge you one level further.
Hit me. Let's go.
So, can reflecting on negative experiences too much end up leading to holding the grudge longer? If you end up in this chamber where you're just replaying experiences in your mind, it may only make those feelings stronger.
It's very true. It's the negative feedback loop. I think it's talked about in books for sure. I think it's something that is subjective from person to person. And I think to an extent, you need to learn your own coping mechanisms to make sure that that doesn't happen. Because I think for some people, myself, I know it doesn't happen that often. I'm fine with being able to, just sort of reflect upon what's happening and move forward and not let it have too much of a, weight held upon me. But for other people, having to think back upon those experiences, reflect upon them, is negative, like it was with my old friend. He tried to avoid it because it caused him grief or pain, or brought the emotions to the forefront of his mind. So I think that learning how to reflect individually is also important. Learning those mechanisms for reflecting is incredibly crucial in making sure that you can properly deal with the emotions that you're feeling.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely spot on. Going back to this idea of mechanisms for dealing with getting rid of a grudge, like this is a huge part of it, because I do think you're right. We do need to reflect on these things, but we need to do it in such a way where we're not putting ourselves in that negative feedback loop.
Exactly. You're not being self-destructive.
We need to get good at reflecting and coming to conclusions and accepting the reality of the situation we're in.
Yep, for sure. Just understanding that life isn't fair, and it's gonna beat you sometimes, and sometimes it's gonna lift you up, but you need to stay strong through the ups and the downs.
Absolutely. I think you touched too on this idea that, again, it is a subjective experience. Do you think that certain personality types are more prone to this than others?
Oh, absolutely. People who grow up around people who tend to hold the grudges, maybe that parent who's like, oh, da, 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 this one person did this to me this one time, would be far more prone to holding a grudge than, actually, maybe this is a better way to put it. Depending upon the person you are, seeing your parent do that will shape how you deal with these situations. Because for someone who takes that and is like, yeah, that's how I gotta be, that makes perfect sense, will be more prone to hold the grudge. But for someone like me or you, seeing your dad be holding those grudges, you're kind of just like, oh, that doesn't quite make sense. Like, why? And then you can think about it, and then I think people like that, like us, are less likely to hold those grudges.
Yeah, the one example that popped into my head, going back to that negative feedback loop kind of thing, maybe addictive personalities would have trouble with letting go of grudges, because it's almost like you get addicted to that. It almost makes you feel good if you can like blame someone. You're like, oh yeah, it wasn't my fault, and then you just, every time you reflect on it, you get that like dopamine hit or whatever.
Mm-hmm. It's like feeling that you need the control. It's like that illusion of control that the scenario gives you. You feel like you have all of this power and control because, I've got this anger pent up towards this one person. But, it may not be a shared feeling. You may be the only one holding this grudge. So the power really is only held within your own mind.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that I feel strongly in, is that, all we have is control over how we feel and what we do with those feelings, right? So it's up to us to learn from our experiences, to find conclusions, to reflect, and to do the best we can to move forward, even when circumstances are not favorable.
When the tide's pushing against you, you gotta move forward, because time stops for nobody. And if you're gonna lag behind, it's not gonna wait for you. So sometimes you really just gotta trudge through the mud when it gets hard.
Well, I feel like this has been a productive conversation. Do you have anything else? Final thoughts?
I wouldn't say so. I agree. I think this was great.
All right. Well, I think that's all the time we have for this week. And why don't you take us home?
Alrighty. Well, if you guys want some more content before next week's episode, you can follow us at The Wrong Idea on Instagram, TikTok, and X. And thank you guys for listening. We'll see you next week.
Got a thought that challenges the norm? We want to hear it. Post your wrong idea with the hashtag Wrong Idea. That's RONG idea. And join the conversation. Who knows? Your perspective might just be featured in a future episode. Remember, in a world of endless perspectives, all ideas are wrong ideas. Until next time, keep thinking, keep challenging, and keep embracing the unconventional.